Today we have a panel to discuss RFP, and I'll try to stop saying P so much because they puff in the microphone. Put it back here. We have our panel on RFPs. We do have, let me read off the names. Okay, so we have Lydia Reyes, so she's with Stanley Security. Say hello, Lydia.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon.
We also have David Bertolette.
Yes.
Almost had it. Almost had it.
Almost.
I keep trying to make him Italian, and he said no.
No.
So he's with Sony Electronics. And then we have Lauren Francis from Mission Fed Credit Union. Oh, I hear this big cheer coming from Lisa. Wow. And then we have David Suter from CBSI.
Hello.
These are all very experienced in the RFP process. So whether you are an associate member looking to see how the mind of facility managers work, or if you, and that's a scary thing, or if you are a facilities person looking for maybe some best practices, this is the place to be. So Glenda, are your people ready? If you guys have any questions, please let Glenda know in the chat. She will contact us and we will ask the panel the questions. Now I'm going to ask Denise Colstock, who is our chair of professional development, to come and start off this party.
Okay, we're going to start off. We're going to ask each panelist to give us about 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, to tell us who they are, what company they work with, what their position is, and a little bit about their experience with the RFP process. Lydia, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I'm with Stanley Convergent Security Solutions. Oh.
What is this?
That's your microphone. It's okay. It's right there.
Right there? Okay,
It's
hi
all
again.
the same
I'm with Stanley Convergent Security Solutions. I've been with them for the position of 23 years. I'm a security consultant, and I've been working in the market here in San Diego, and I've grown to work with organizations both in the public sector and in just regular core commercial. And I've grown to have national accounts that are throughout the globe. And I think my experience, I have to say that the best experience that I've had, with RFPs is I worked for a company that was called Sonatrol, and it's an audio activated intrusion system, and it's a proprietary system. And Stanley purchased the Sonatrol Corporation, and we manufacture that product. When I was with Sonatrol, I was able to work with my clients, both in the public sector and again in the commercial sector, that had Sonatrol, and it was sole sourced. So when an RFP would go out, I would actually work with the architects, the engineers, have design specifications actually built into that RFP. And we would have all the rough-in requirements in, we would have all of the standards of what that technology was. So when that RFP would go out, all the electrical contractors, general contractors would come to me to get my numbers, because again, I was sole source. Even though it was an RFP, it was committed to, the customer was committed to that technology, and that was the only technology that could be used. So I have many school districts, higher ed, again, a lot of national accounts, and a lot of core customers that have this technology. So for me, that RFP was the best experience because they had to use me. So that was wonderful. And I've also worked with clients and the understanding exactly and precisely, like Maricosta College, they have RFP standards and security specifications that down to the screw is written in that specification. And they are so to the max. That security consultant, has designed what that access control is going to be, what the intrusion system is going to be, what the fire system, what surveillance. It is written to that spec, and you have to meet that specification. And they're talking about running wires, and every 10 feet you have to label it. So in that spec, it's very important, that as a vendor, as an integrator, that we have to read line for line and meet that specification, because if you don't meet it, it's your dime, because that general contractor or that electrical contractor or the district or the company is going to hold you accountable to that specification. So that's been, my experience in both, a sole source situation and then also, helping clients and understanding that RFP, to the T, and then being able to, write it, design it, specify it, and then also meet what that customer is requiring.
Thank you,
Pass it on
Lydia.
to you.
David?
Hi, good to see everybody after it's been a while, 3D. Do I need?
Yeah, just put it in front of you.
Okay. All right. Can you hear me now? So anyway, it's great to see everybody, in 3D. We've been doing a lot of these 2D meetings for the last almost 2 years, it seems. But anyway, I'm with Sony Electronics here in San Diego. I've been with them for 42 years. And I also oversee buildings in San Jose, Paramus, and Los Angeles area. Support them. And, with facilities, there's just, as an end user, there's just so many different areas in which the RFPs are applicable. But I just pulled out one. And because I know that it can resonate with a lot of people here within IFMA. And I just talked about a janitorial RFP, a multi-site RFP. And when I say multi-site, this was for San Diego, it was for San Jose, it was for two Los Angeles locations. And then we had also partnered with Sony Pictures on the last one, and we're getting ready to do another one. To be determined, whenever they say, yeah, we're going to come back into the building, then we'll probably do another one. But our RFP process on this one, why I think it was successful was it was hosted online by procurement. So we gave them a list of vendors, they signed up, and then procurement would pre-vet them. And I think that was also helped was that we had a very clear defined document, and also procurement outlined the bid format. So it's one thing to get the bid, but it's also important you get it in the format that's consistent so you can compare bids. The other thing was that we provide the legal documents, meaning the master services agreement, any SOW terms that you need, vendor requirements that may be required for OSHA for training, insurance, and also payment terms. We put all of that up front, and it's important because we've done RFPs before, and we get down to the last person, we say, oh, this is great. And they said, well, we can't meet your terms. And all of a sudden now, what do? You start over again. And you look kind of embarrassed. So I think it's really important to kind of lay all that stuff out there. And then they can still decide whether or not they want to participate, because these are the terms that you're putting out front. So I think that's really important. And then we also had the companies do a collective job walk, because that way everybody hears the same story. They all have the same scope, but they hear the same thing. Somebody asks questions for clarifications. It's just a simpler process to do it that way. Yes, there can be some other after the fact, either conversations and questions, but yet they're shared out amongst the group. And I think that really helped. For the lessons learned, and not so much just on this one, but other ones. Like I said, you want to get all of the different groups that may have a stake in it. It could be procurement, certainly for SLAs, payment terms, price negotiations. Legal, certainly for the T's and C's that your company needs to abide by. Risk for insurance requirements. Facilities, any effect it may have on the building or the grounds. Security for personal access requirements, because they may set, different levels of screening that each employee must go through. And also IT, because you may not think that, well, all right, if we're doing janitorial, is there an IT requirement? Yes, because they actually sit on our network systems. We may provide them with a phone. And we've done other RFPs where they actually have software that needs to run on our system. So it's important to get them involved up front. Environmental health and safety. If there's chemicals that have to be reviewed, because we have a very strict list of chemicals that we're allowed to use on site. Are there certain work types that pose a danger? Is there any special training that's required? So we get our EHS people involved so that they can vet out any safety, environmental, and health restrictions and sustainability for best practices. Are we going to generate additional waste streams? How best do we handle those? And then your key stakeholders, which these are the people that have the input on scope, and they're really the ones that are going to be impacted. So it's really important to get them involved. And then if you're in a leased facility, we found to get the landlord and property management involved because they may have also additional insurance and access requirements that you have to abide by. And through that, so we make sure that we provide the thorough scope document that includes all the requirements from the groups above. But we also don't try and be so detailed. I applaud you for yours. That's awesome. But for, what we're looking at, because we want the vendor to come back with the best solution. We don't want to have to dictate how you're going to clean something. And because they can offer some best practices that we may not be completely aware of. And the other thing, we ask for cost saving step. Now, certainly when we talk about if we're going to have discussions amongst the different vendors, we don't share those, right? We keep them confidential, but we certainly want to encourage that discussion. And then other things to ask are NDAs required, non-disclosure agreements required before you start the process. And that's something that legal will advise on. And are there any union stipulations? We had one where even though it was a multi-site, one of our sites had a union clause, so that instantly dropped out some of the participants. And are there any local, state, or federal guidelines or fees that have to be included within the bid process? And then also finally, the transition process and schedule is really important so that you can say, yeah, you have the bid, but how are you gonna now execute in a fashion that doesn't interrupt the building? And then finally, pet peeves during the RFP process. I was good. I only kept it to 3. So the one thing when the participants or bidders, they ask questions that are in the RFP document itself, because that means they didn't read it. They didn't study it, or they don't care about it. Asking details about how they compare to other bidders before the bid is awarded. I'm not going to go out and say, well, I think you're 10% high or 20% low. I don't think it's fair to the other bidders. And then finally, a bidder wanting to come back and lower the price after they realize they didn't get the job. And as far as I'm concerned, is that you give me the best price up front. If you don't, you're done. That's all I can ask. So I hope some of this was helpful. I know I went through it pretty quick, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone may have. Thank you.
Okay, Lauren.
Thank you. Hi, I am Lauren Francis and I work for Mission Federal Credit Union, and I have been with Mission Fed for almost 10 years now. I've held various roles in the Department of Facilities, but right now I'm the security specialist and project manager. So primarily my job is overseeing all of the physical security for Mission Fed. And most of you know Mission Fed, we have 33 branches here in San Diego County. We have 3 corporate offices that we manage. So from my perspective of RFPs, it is from a multi-site location. We have vendors that come in that have to do all of our locations, and they vary in size. They vary from lease to own. So property managers get involved, whereas we own locations, so we dictate certain things. So I just wanted to talk about an example of an RFP that we just did recently, where it was very extensive, very complex. Had to do, oh, I'm sorry, can you guys hear me now? Okay, sorry. Ooh, really loud. Is that good? Okay, I feel like I'm echoing really bad here. So I wanted to share an experience that I had recently, a few months back, doing a security RFP that was very extensive and required so much detail ahead of time. I spent about 6 months before we even sent out the RFP, going through all of our equipment. Every branch, every location has different equipment. Some have fire, some don't have fire, et cetera. So really for Mission Fed, the importance of starting out before you even send an RFP out is making sure that you go through previous contracts, previous RFPs, documents, making sure everything is up to date. I'm sure most of you have maybe had a situation where something it was out of date or wasn't correct. So we take the time to really go through everything and make sure it is up to date. And then we actually pre-vet our vendors. So through IFMA and other associations like IFMA, That's where we tend to go to source our vendors. We like the partnerships we have created here and the networking that we've built. So we go through other organizations to find our vendors. We set up meetings with them, which is really important for us because we are all about vendor relationships and providing great service from both ends. So we want to have a conversation with them to find out about their company, learn about what they can provide, have them ask questions about Mission Fed. So we can ensure that the relationship is mutual for both parties. Sometimes it doesn't work out where a vendor thinks that they can handle, the expectations of your contract and they can't. So this is our opportunity to have that conversation with them and really go through the scope and the details and ask those questions. We also like to meet the team that we're dealing with because most of the time we deal with the salespeople, but they're not the people that we work with on the contract side. Once it's signed and sealed and delivered, we might have a completely different team. So we invite everybody to come and talk to us so we learn about every part of the company from the sales to the service side. So in the example of the security RFP that we did, it was definitely extensive in the sense that there was a lot of equipment that had to be detailed in the RFP, and we provided so many documents, but it also allowed the vendor the opportunity to ask questions, send up RFIs, which then we can share with the other vendors. So I think asking the questions and allowing them to ask them is important, because otherwise, if you assume that something is correct and you don't question it, then sometimes, like David said, it can be misinterpreted or wrong. The security RFP was very extensive, obviously. But from a client perspective, I think it's really important to make sure that what you're providing to the service vendor or the vendor that you're reaching out to is as bestly written as possible with the most detail so that there aren't any questions, because unfortunately, I think sometimes they don't read everything and they assume. So then you run into issues where the contract is signed and things are missed or misinterpreted. Sorry.
All right, my name is, you hear me okay? Okay. Name is David Suter from CBSI, president of CBSI, and we're a construction project management and relocation planning business. And so I have experience with RFPs for over 20 years, and that's in both the public and private. So I'm going to give a few scenarios and give you some takeaways regarding what we've been through, what we've dealt with. And, we've had the experience of writing RFPs for clients, and we've had the experience, obviously, as a vendor of answering RFPs. And there is a big difference on how, number one, public entity does their RFPs versus private, and everywhere in between. So I guess I have a first question. How many of you have been involved in a failed RFP, whether it's on the answering or the writing side, where once you got into it or it started to go, it was a train wreck and you saw it coming? Get some hands? Right, everyone, for the most part. And some of you were on the owner side, some of you were on the bidder side. And when it comes down to it, when you're doing RFPs, it's a lot of time. As Lauren said, she spent 6 months writing an RFP. And if there's something wrong with it, what's that cost to you? What does that cost you as a bidder that spent 3 months maybe answering an RFP? We went through a RFP process that did take 6 months, and with multiple versions of it. And it's a lot of time and effort. And if you don't win that, then how much did that cost you? And on the other side, if you are a company that needs a service and you messed up on your RFP and your old janitorial contract ran out and you don't have a new janitorial contract in place, what does that cost you and your company and your staff's experience? So I'll give you an example of a client that we worked with, and this was a church, and they owned a property. So they had the church and they had multiple vendors, retail vendors within that property. And I got a call from a friend who was on the board of the church and said, "Hey, we want to do solar on our roof. We got 3 bids, and the bids range from $150,000 to $450,000. What do we do?" And we have seen this, I've seen this in my career time and time again, where if you don't have a clear scope of work, each vendor is going to interpret it differently. And you're going to get a million different prices. And then you go, where do we go from here? You got to start over. And that's what we did. We came in and we helped it. And as a company, had we ever written a solar RFP before? Nope. But there's this thing called Google. And we knew that there was someone out there that had written one and posted one. And so we searched, and this was probably 4 or 5 years ago. We searched and we found one. We said, this is a great basis. Let's start from here and then build it specific for the company or for the church. And so we did that. We went through the whole process. We brought in those 3 vendors and added a couple more and came back, and the prices were around $450. So one of them got it right. But then the church said, you know what, now that we're doing this, let's see what we can go bigger. And they ended, the contract ended up being $750,000 because they wanted that much more work. They felt more comfortable that they were getting apples to apples comparison. And once they saw the detail of the RFP that we created and what the vendors could offer, they said, I think this investment, which, $750,000 could be repeat back in 7 years. They said, let's do it. And so that was a really good experience. But I want to give you some takeaways. And my takeaways are, know your purpose, know what your scope of work is. The second one is know your audience, know who the bidders are, who you need to contact, whether service providers or you have a great place like IFMA to reach out to get service providers. And then the last one is know your contractual requirements. And those are the rules and laws. And you're going to find a lot more of that on the public sector than you will on the private, but there is a big difference. So we'll go over purpose first. And so the purpose is, what are you trying to accomplish? Is it an RFP for a general contractor? Is it a mover? Are you trying to put EV chargers in or an HVAC service provider? There's a ton of different ways. There's a ton of different formats for RFPs, and they're not cookie cutter. So if you just went out for a GC, don't think you can use that same RFP format to get your janitorial service. They're completely different scopes of work. And then when it comes to, can you write a detailed scope of work? Do you have the experience to write a detailed scope of work? And it's going to take a lot of time. Like Lauren said, 6 months. I know Lydia, we were working together 10 years ago, and it was months to get these scopes of work written with the architects and engineers. And again, on the public side of things, going through schools, it's just a whole other level of what you have to put forward. And if you don't know how to write a scope of work, Google it. I guarantee someone has posted on there. It's in a PDF and you can go from there.
Hey, David, really quick. I think with IFMA being a resource to everyone, if someone has written, like David has written a lot of scope or RFPs, Lauren asked them, use IFMA as a resource. Why reinvent the wheel? If people have already done it, then they're able to, use IFMA again as a resource.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I just had one comment on scope of works. In addition to Google, if you don't know a scope of work, if you have a good relationship with your current vendor, they will often provide you with that information and then you can adjust it. You don't have to start from scratch.
Yes.
So use the people in this room.
Absolutely.
Unless you have a really
Can I make a more suggestion out there on top of yours?
sure.
I'm with the county of San Diego. All those bids are public information on the internet, so you can just go to the county or the city, whatever jurisdiction it is, look at theirs and you can start with theirs. You don't have to stay with it, but there's a basis also.
Absolutely. Agreed. So, when it comes to the RFP, and some are going to be really detailed and take a lot of time, but if you're a vendor that does security, you have the expectation that it's going to be long and there's a lot of details, where if it's a mover or you're just putting an EV chargers in, it's going to be shorter, and you want to make it simple and easy to understand for the vendors. And mandatory job walk. So many people don't want to do it. It's a mistake. Spend the time to have a mandatory job walk. There are things that you will see, or one of the vendors will see while you're out there, that will get missed by looking at a piece of paper or a PDF online. So mandatory job walk is crucial. And then the second takeaway was your audience. And again, with public, whether government, education, municipalities, most of that stuff is publicly bid. It's bid prevailing wage. It's usually an open or a bid where it's read open. So low bidder gets it regardless. Low bidder gets it unless they can disqualify you. And that's a whole other rabbit hole to go down. And when it comes to prevailing wage, if you are a vendor and you're working on prevailing wage work, and I'll even say if you're a municipality or a school or whatever, and you don't know what prevailing wage is required, please do your homework and find out. We recently did a mover RFP where the city, to be unnamed, did not specify prevailing wage. And so everyone bid it non-prevailing wage. And then we asked the question and said, shouldn't this be prevailing wage? And they came back, oh yeah. So, you know, it's the experience in knowing what to ask and what questions, if don't always assume that who is writing the RFP is smarter than you. If you have had the experience that, hey, it's a school, it's going to be prevailing wage, then ask the question. Don't just wait for, you put your bid in and we'll see what they say. Figure it out up front. Again, asking, finding a trusted group you can reach out to. We talked about a little bit, whether it be IFMA. Sometimes you can pre-qualify if you know that you're going to go out for a big project. As a project's being developed, you can also start the pre-qualification by putting a RFQ out, request for quote, or request for information. It's an RFI, different from the RFIs within construction, but an RFI to request information to see what vendors are even qualified to bid on your work. And then, can we be, we're among friends here. Can we be a little bit real here? If you're getting a reference, there's a very good chance it's useless. Unless you're getting a reference from someone that you know. If you have vendors and they say, here's my 3 references, you can call all 3 of those people. None of them are going to give them a bad reference unless you know them personally. So the way to avoid that, if you want to ask those questions, make sure you have very specific questions that are different and maybe allow them to answer a little more things, or start asking them questions where they'll give you a little more information than they normally would, instead of, ask and say, hey, can you tell me about, and they give you a quick answer and you're like, okay, thank you, click. You got to ask more questions, because we have seen so many where the reference, and especially if it's public, they're not going to give you anybody a bad reference because of legalities and all that stuff. And that's another rabbit hole to go down. But just be really careful, because there's a lot of references that you'll get that just don't pan out. The vendor just is not who they say they are. So just do your homework.
We're being told to put the toggle in the middle, please.
They can't see everybody.
Okay.
It's picking up all the audio, so it's doing great.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right, and then the last one, your contractual requirements. And again, like I just mentioned, get your RF straight. There's a difference between RFQ, RFP, and RFI. And if you're a public entity, they mean different things. And RFQ really limits the amount that the contract can be. And this was another problem with the city that didn't realize that and sent out contracts for all these vendors, and then realized that they sent out what was supposed to be $100,000 contract for everybody was actually $100,000 contract that could be split between everybody. And they didn't know that. They didn't know that, and they committed more funds than they legally could. So just being very careful. As far as your requirements on the property, do you own the property? You can make a lot more decisions. If not, are you leasing? Then you got to get the owner of the property involved and pre-approved. And does this work require a permit? That's a big deal too. If you're going for a general contractor and there's permitting, it's going to take a long time, especially post-COVID, especially through the county or through the city of San Diego. It's going to take much longer than it normally did.
And it's all electronically done.
And it's all electronically done. Yep. And as David mentioned, is there a non-disclosure agreement? Get that handled up front. If you're going into banks, obviously there's probably a non-disclosure agreement there. And then architect and engineer, same thing. If you're doing general contractor work, do you need design, architect, engineer? Same process, but you got to start a lot sooner. And then labor compliance, are you dealing with prevailing wage? And if you're a vendor that is bidding on prevailing wage, can you handle prevailing wage? Do you know how to do it? We've dealt with a lot that don't. We've had a lot of experience and figured it out, but we run into that all the time, whether we're representing a municipality or a school or bidding on something. So just to recap, know your purpose, know your bidders, and know the contractual requirements.
Thank you, David.
Yep.
We have a really good question that came in, and I think this is pertinent to this discussion. Does your company set certain thresholds that dictate a required RFP versus immediate purchase? Kind of.
Yes. So this is David Bertolette with Sony. Yes, there are levels within the organization that dictates whether is it just a bid, is it just 3 bids, or do you go full RFP?
What would dictate that? What the decision would be?
Well, the decision comes down to really the financial outlay, right? And also, is it short-term or is it going to be a long-term relationship?
I think in the public sector, there are definitely laws that are in place, to dictate what it would be, how much money they can actually, put out there and what they're bound to. I know with the school districts, it is.
It could also be a timing, like, so at Mission Fed, we're required, we cannot have a vendor for more than 5 years without a full-scale RFP. It's just an organizational requirement.
Yeah, and it's a decision from the company.
Right.
Yep.
Lauren, do you wanna add anything?
Oh, no, that's what I was gonna say. Lisa said. No, it's okay. Mission Fed teamwork.
Yeah. Okay, the next question. What process do you use to decide upon a vendor on a scorecard? For example, say you have an RFP that goes out and the bids are actually pretty similar. So how do you decide who's going to win?
I'll step into that one first, and it depends. I would say if the numbers are close, then the next thing we look at is the presentation. What does that actual proposal look like? Is it just a one-page Excel spreadsheet with a little information? Or did they spend a little bit of time? Maybe it's 10 pages or less, but they're putting a better product forward, showing that they understand a little bit better, that they spent a little more time on it. That's going to get our attention more than maybe price. If the other one's maybe a couple grand less, but this one looks like they've spent more time on it, we're going to lean that way.
And I've bid on situations where even though I may be higher because of my performance and our company's performance, they'll go with Stanley, in lieu of someone else that, may have been less. So it's up to the individual, company. And again, this is in the private sector. Public, it's very different.
Yeah.
Because they'll go with low bid.
Question for you on follow-up for Dave. Is there a best and final if they're too close? Would you go to a best and final where they have a chance to, you give them two people a chance to rehash each other at each other?
Not necessarily. I think it depends on the size of the job and the importance. Do we have another 2 weeks to go through that process? Or do we have enough information to make a good decision? And typically what we would do is make a recommendation to the client and say, hey, these numbers are close. This one's a little bit higher, but if you look at how they presented and the detailed scope of work that they wrote that said that they were going to do, we recommend going this route. But we have seen it also where, hey, these two are close, or there's 5 bidders and 2 are within $10,000 and the other ones are, way off. So you could go back and say, hey, best and final. That's happened to us. Good and bad results. And we have done that too. Absolutely.
Yeah, we've also done that. We've narrowed it down to maybe 2 or 3. They're that close. We go back to them, what else can they bring to the table? And the other thing you have to think about, is it the incumbent that is one of the really close bidders? Because you have to think about, is it worth upsetting the apple cart and bringing someone else in?
Right.
Especially if there's a lot of ramp up and training required. So you need to take that into
That's a
consideration.
good point, David.
Definitely.
I have a question. Do you ever incorporate best value?
The question is, do you ever incorporate best value? I'm repeating this quickly online, viewers.
I would say, yeah. I mean, obviously, and that's part of the price is a little bit higher, but the value is better because they put more into it. Or it's the incumbent, they came back, they're a little bit higher, but you think about the disruption of trying to switch out an entire service provider. So yeah, absolutely. Now, as Lydia said, when it comes to the schools, no, it's low bid unless you can disqualify that. And to get a board of directors to disqualify a low bid contractor, they won't do it no matter how much of a nightmare it's going to be in the future.
Or try to become sole source.
Yes,
They have to go with you.
absolutely.
Okay, tell us about an experience you've had that either went very smoothly or very badly, and why.
I'll answer that first. It was, again, a public bid. And when you're not reading that specification or you are reading that specification to the T and you're bidding it and the other vendors are not reading that specification and winning, it becomes extremely, extremely frustrating. And you lose every time. And, being able to, really work on an RFP and that organization or that district or the commercial company or private, company, they are looking at apples to apples. And I would hope, that specific, organization again, or district are looking at that, because I have lost, in RFPs and I'm the incumbent and I don't like losing. Okay, I don't like losing. And again, going back to, the actual, they allowed me to go back and audit the two recommendations and the two quotes. And that other vendor missed so much. So now it's upon the district to go back to, that vendor and say, you need to meet this specification. And it's now on that vendor, to provide it at their cost and not on change orders. Go ahead.
So in a situation like that, one thing is it's incumbent upon the selection committee to make sure they address each line item, each parameter, to address those kind of things, and really think about, is this reasonable for this request? Obviously, your bid had addressed that, and most of the other bids hadn't. But on the other side of the coin, have you been in a situation where they came back and said, I know you didn't win this bid, but we had problems with the previous, potential winner, and had to go a new route, and now we're going to bring that bid back to you and go ahead and let you guys go ahead and award that bid to you?
Yes, in other projects. Other projects, because they've had, vendors that they won't even invite to bid because of their experience, that it was so bad that they said, we're not even going to include them in the, RFP request. So, it definitely comes around, but it's very hard to, as a vendor, as an integrator in my business, to work on RFPs, because it has to be, and I don't mind losing if it's apples to apples, and if I'm higher, then I'm higher. If, but it has to be very clear that it is meeting what that specification. And I wanted to bring something else up too, that, working with the organization or the district, they have to understand what they want. And that has to be a clear picture from the beginning. Again, and for security standards, they have to understand, what do they want? How do they want it to work? How are you executing it? And they have to really have that understanding when that RFP is written, because again, as David said, with the solar companies, they were all over the place. They had no clear path to understand, what is it that they were envisioning and what their wish list was. And like I said, back in Maricosta colleges, our specs are just incredibly well written. I mean, if they're well written, and it could be, for a jail, that's how tight their security is. And very well written. David, do you have any comments on your?
Well, I think it comes down to my, simplistic view is that, really as much detail as practical that you put in up front, you put all of your requirements up front, it's going to help. The bids that did not come back are really things that we just missed, and that was our fault. We didn't do maybe due diligence, and like David said, job walks are key, because we've been out on job walks and we go, wow, we completely missed that. Yeah. Then we have to go back and maybe send an addendum or back and then also some of the other questions that you don't typically ask, but if it's a union contractor, what are some of the maybe some of the union changes or fees that are coming down, year over year, so you have an idea, what you can expect your cost to be year over year.
Question for the panel that I think might be interesting for this group. Where are you advertising your RFPs, or are you finding that, like maybe Lauren and David from Sony, are you reaching out directly, or are you just being on your website? I think because you have both parties in here that would be interested to learn more about where are you finding your RFPs, and how are you attaining the bidders?
So for Mission Fed, we definitely use, I mean, if Mike said, is a great resource, but I reach out directly. I want to set up meetings with them. I want to talk to them. I want to give them kind of what I call the pre conversation that we have to say, hey, we're looking for this service. I've found you through IFMA, I found you through Google, I found you through whatever resource, or so-and-so had a reference for you. Can you talk to me about your company, what you guys do? This is what we're looking for. Does it sound like a good fit? And if it does, then we set up the next meeting to actually sit down and go through, not necessarily the entire scope, but at least enough to have them understand and know that they can participate. Because a lot of times it does come down where vendors, no, actually, I don't think I can do 33 branches and 3 corporate offices that are 120,000 square feet, and our portfolio is huge. So I think that's for us, we do direct contact, set up these meetings and talk to them in detail.
Our procurement, what they do is they typically have a list of bidders from previous RFPs that they'll start with. And then they'll also reach out to me, do you have any other recommendations for bidders? And then I will give them that list, and then they will send out the electronic request for proposal.
In the public bid situation, it's on their websites. So, again, with the school districts, it's there, it's on the websites. And then that's upon you, to follow through and to really research and be on top of it, because you could miss it.
Yeah, and a lot of them use Planet Bids.
Oh, that's right.
And Planet Bids will send out, you can sign up and show what type of work you do. And then when they have a listing, it'll automatically send you an email, which is really helpful. And that's mostly for the public entities, but there are private entities that use it too.
I want to suggest to the county participates from time to time. There are some fairs out there, some networking opportunities that promotes the county and says, hey, would you like to do contracting with the county? And they illustrate the kind of contracts that they have and what kind of vendors they're looking for to get on a list for future notifications and so forth. And you can call usually the purchasing contract department of the public entities usually to find out if they do something like that or how to get on their bid list.
What is your experience with post RFP interviews for those who did not win?
I've never had one.
Well, I can speak for Mission Fed. We obviously offer, to have a conversation. Most vendors do. Most bidders do want to have a conversation about it. And we try to be as open and honest as we can. Obviously, some information is confidential, but we try to be honest with them and give them feedback to help them in their endeavors moving forward. So if it's a pricing thing, we can't maybe tell them exactly how much they were off, but we can say you were the highest bidder. If it was a service, or a reference issue, or maybe something else happened to the RFP, I didn't feel like they were engaged. They didn't ask questions. They gave me a shorter RFP that wasn't as detailed as others, things like that. We really feel like that feedback is important to them. So if they don't reach out to us, we reach out to them. But most of the time they reach out to us.
I'll give 2 examples, and one was from the previous question of a nightmare. And then the other one was, talking to the vendors after the fact. So we bid on a project, and we were one of the top, and they came back and said best and final. So we worked on the best and final and did it, and we actually won. It was great victory. And then a couple years later, this was same client, much bigger project. And we said, well, they're going to come back and say best and final. So we'll just put our percentages up because I know they're going to negotiate it down. And we actually lost that one because our price was too high. They didn't come back with the best and final that time, even though they had done it the time before. And this was, just a huge mistake on our part, but how are you supposed to know? So that was kind of a nightmare on one. Now, when it comes to post-bid interviews, this was we put an RFP out. We had 4 or 5 vendors, and one of the ones that did not win, low bid, qualifications were there, but the presentation was bad. Really bad, really just generic, and just not a lot of time and effort put into it. So they said, can we have a meeting? Let's talk about, we really want your feedback. We really want to learn from what we did wrong so we can be better the next time. And so that whole conversation was us giving feedback and them defending themselves. So they asked for feedback, but really didn't want any. So it's just, I don't get it, but it was an interesting experience.
From my experience, if I don't win, I'll always go back and ask, can you tell me why? Can you tell me why? And then they'll come back, and then I always ask, who did you go with? And some are very honest, and they'll tell me this is the reason, this is who we went with. And then I go off pouting, you know. Into my office. No, I'm kidding. No, it's true. For about a day, so.
What is a pet peeve you've had in the RFP process?
The RFP itself. I don't like them. I love working, you know, with, again, our clients, and if it is a public situation and I am the incumbent, you know, I am forced to do that. But I, again, would like, you know, working directly, you know, with that individual organization, district, you know, or client, and really understanding. But the one thing that you have to make sure is that it is apples to apples. And that's one of my pet peeves, you know, in losing, is that you're losing to someone else that didn't honestly, you know, bid that correctly. And now who is going back to check it? So you have to make sure too that, you know, you're doing your due diligence, that you're getting what you asked for. What is your pet peeve, David?
Well, sorry, David, I don't want to say this, but you know, with I think I already mentioned it. It's really with the bidders coming back with their best price at the get-go. But I also think what is important on what you said was in the RFP, also having that section, and I think I mentioned it before, where this is the format that I want the bid in, and these are all of the different parameters, so nothing's hidden,
Right.
you know, below just the price. It says, well, this is our labor, this is our material. So.
From my perspective, of vendors who speak negatively about other vendors, that is a huge one for us. We want positive relationships. Previous experiences I get, not everybody's going to get along, not everybody's going to have great relationships, but we are here to seek a positive relationship. So we don't accept that. That's not, you know, don't speak negatively about other people. Negotiating pricing. I know this is different because we are not public, but we want your best pricing moving forward. Like David said, don't want to have to go back and forth and negotiate. If you really are interested in the bid, then come with your best pricing right off the bat. Service providers bidding just to bid. We want a partnership. We are not a number on a spreadsheet. You're not a number on a spreadsheet to us. We are definitely, and I think some of you have worked with Mission Fed, we are all about our partnerships. So we don't want just to be there for you to bid just to bid. We want to make sure that it's mutually, you know, great on both ends, that we're going to be there for you, you'll support us, and that sort of thing. When meeting with a client, know your audience, who you're meeting with, know your team. A lot of vendors will do research on the company that they're bidding in, but know the team that you're going to be working with. We've had situations where maybe I'm in the meeting with my boss and they speak to the wrong person, or they're not addressing one of us or more of us. And it's so know the people that you're working with, know your point of contact, and the team that you're going to be working with, so that you can adequately address every single person in the room. And the biggest pet peeve for me is vendors going to our locations unannounced. As David said, we are a financial institution. It is critical that we work with our vendors on that. So it is in the RFP for every one of Mission Fed's RFPs that if you visit one of our sites without communicating to us and just randomly show up, that is an automatic disqualification. We cannot have people just showing up.
Yeah.
That's very critical for
Okay,
us.
I'm
That
gonna
is
leave,
one of the-
but
And yet it still happens.
And yet it still happens. Yes.
I would say my biggest.
so funny, Scott's like,
happened several
"You're
times
not
this year
here."
where someone will reach out to me and say, hey, we're thinking about doing this project, whether it be relocation or construction. Can you help us kind of figure out how to do this? And so we would help them write an RFP, and then they would take what we wrote, create the RFP and bid it out there, and either not involve us or, you know, not choose us for. We've spent a ton of time, and now if it's a friend, if it's someone from IFMA and you need some help, no problem. But this, you know, a friend of a friend or a contact of a contact to really use our experience, our years of experience to help something, and not only not pay for the services of helping write the RFP, but then to completely disqualify you from the vendor because you might have the inner edge without saying that up front. Now, if they're saying it up front, fine, we're happy to help, but that's happened 2 or 3 times over the years, and it's like,
David,
wow.
that's when you charge him then.
Yeah.
From the beginning.
Yeah. Lessons learned.
Are there any last thoughts?
I have a question for you guys. Have you guys been involved with any contracts where it looked like, especially like with Mission Fed and Sony, where the contract, you made a comment about the bidders who just bid just to get on a bid list or something, but where they bid to win the contract, but they really didn't bid enough money to successfully complete all the requirements of the contract throughout the term and have to struggle with that down the road, or they complain about how they want more money,
Yep.
or they can't keep all their employees, you know. I'm sure you guys have faced that at some point. Is that correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, we've actually had to change vendors during the middle of a contract in those, we've had that situation, we've actually had to change a vendor and go with somebody else because they did not bid appropriately, they didn't read all the fine print, they didn't communicate, and we thought that they were a great fit for us, and halfway through the contract, it was not working out, and we had to make a switch. And we don't like doing that because we want to make sure it's, you know, on both ends. We don't want you
Cost
to
time, money for everybody.
time, money for everybody,
You
right?
put a
It's
bid
huge.
bond requirement on their bids?
I'm sorry?
You put a bid bond requirement on their bids and performance bonds so
No,
that
oh, no,
if they ever back out or can't do it, that
oh,
they're gonna pay at one point, at
No.
some point,
not us.
given the
nobody.
cost and the effort, go through the bid process again and hiring them.
Nobody.
The public bids require
We
it.
do in public, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys did in the.
Not in private. You don't see that in private as much.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
I mean, that's all, I mean, I'm in facilities, but that's why we really have our procurement team as a partner, because they're the ones that dig into the vendor to make sure that that doesn't happen. And that also that, you know, we've written the scope out and, you know, for the term to really try and keep that from happening, but it does.
Right.
And I think that was, I can't remember if it was Lauren or David's point, was to the issue of making sure that the entire team is part of the RFP process
Yeah.
on the vendor side.
Mhm.
Because if you're just dealing with the salesperson, and this is exactly what happened with us, they told us everything that they wanted to know. We wanted to know. They gave us all the pricing that encouraged us to select them. But then when it got turned over to the people that were managing the contract, they're like, we can't do this. So
Yeah.
involving the whole team is really critical.
And writing that in the RFP, they have to be there because the sales guy, he's supposed to make a sale and he does. But yeah, writing that out in the RFP, that's why it's so important to spend that extra time on the RFP, that all that is detailed.
Oh, gee.
Time's up.
That's not your loss.
I'm going to hand it over to Sherry for some closing notes, but I want to have everyone thank our panelists for today.
Thank you.
You're good.
Well, I appreciate everyone who came out tonight. Thank you to all of our panelists. I want to say hello to everyone that is online right now. We have B. Clark, and you can put your full name next time so I don't massacre it. Brett Tyrell, Christina, I guess we all know her by her first name. Dana Ford, Donna Frick, Izear, Izear Williams, Michael Raspa, I believe he's with Pegasus, Scott Moray, and a guy named Robert. We love Robert. We're not quite sure what his last name is. I'm going to pretend it's Taylor. So hello to everyone. And Glenda Didier, our VP1, thank you for hosting on Zoom. Everyone just give us a big wave because we can't see you. Anyway, everyone wave back. Thank you all for coming. I want to just give you a couple last reminders. Number one, I know you're here for the cookies. They will be on the way out. They're right there. They're not there. Those are mine. Oh, those are Karen's. Okay, so $50 you can get a cookie from Karen. The cookies are in the back. The DoubleTree famous cookies are in the back. Yes, we did get them, the last shipment of them before COVID took over. No, I'm kidding. They're there for you. Please enjoy. Please network. We know you love live networking. Please meet James from Ace Relocations. I promised him to introduce him to a few people today. So please meet James today. Say hello to him. Remember, December 8th is our holiday party. We have a lot of things happening in October. You'll see them on our website. You'll see it in the announcements that Karen sends out, the newsletter, the upcoming events. Please sign up. We got so much going on that we have for you. Anything, questions that you need, we are a resource. Reach out to us. We will be happy to find someone to help you with it. So if there's nothing else, we want to thank you so much for being with us today. And we look forward to more live events with you.
And I just want to end, any of the guests that are here today, I chair membership. So please reach out to me if you want to, participate in our chapter.
I'll give you an extra cookie. Volunteers. And if we have anyone who would like to volunteer, right here. Come see Lydia. She is the great gatherer of volunteers. She raised me, and if she can raise you. Thank you all. Have a good day.